Today we are going to talk about something that I think a lot of us struggle with, but not a lot of people talk about. In fact, I think I've only ever heard one other person talk about it. So I'm just going to give you a little example from my own life. So when I went no contact with my parent who was toxic, I expected to just kind of immediately fall down and crash sort of emotionally, but that didn't happen. What did happen is that I felt this huge weight lift off my chest. And suddenly I felt great. I felt like I could make all these decisions without worrying about what people were going to say or think or feel about them. And I had never done that before in my life, if we're being honest. I ended up experiencing sort of a crash after a few weeks. I went through the grief period. I mourned a little bit of what I thought I had. And this crash would take a while for me to get past. So I want to talk to you about that today and how we all kind of go through stuff like that.
So let's get started.
We've talked before about how trauma bonds that we develop with narcissists are sort of very similar to any other addiction. It affects the same part of the brain as alcohol addiction, drug addiction, or anything else. So we become literally addicted to these people and to these toxic relationships. I think that's why it's so much more difficult to end a toxic relationship with a narcissist or end any relationship with a narcissist than it is to end any other type of relationship. Not that we want to end a bunch of relationships, but unfortunately when we discover these people, that's what we end up with. I have made videos in detail about toxic relationships and trauma bonding, so I will make sure to put a link to that in the description. But just like any other addict, we need to recover from our toxic relationships so that we can gain control over the addiction to them and so that we can start to create the lives that we actually want. But this one phenomenon that puts us at risk early in recovery, and that if we fall for it, we might end up relapsing and falling for the Hoover and getting stuck back with the narcissist, or worse, we end up chasing them as a result of this. It's called the pink cloud. It's a term that is used to describe that feeling of elation that a lot of addicts and alcoholics say that they feel after they detox and move into sobriety. Well, the same thing happened to me when I went no contact from a parent. Now, in my previous relationship, I could tell you that there was a little bit of this that happened, but it wasn't quite as profound as it was in the case of the parent who I went no contact. What happens is that when we finally let go of this person, we feel more excited, we feel more hopeful than we have maybe ever, certainly in ways we didn't before. Things always seem to be moving in the right direction, and we think maybe, again, for the first time ever, that our lives might actually go well. But there's only one problem with it, and that is the crash that comes after. It can make us dangerously overconfident in ourselves and our recovery. Let me just pause here and say, somebody asked me in one of the groups, can we talk about this issue? And so here I am talking about it. But the term pink cloud is, like I said, from the AA and NA type programs, and it was not me who connected it here. It was actually Kim Saeed, as far as I know, who connected the two things together the first time. She's the only other person I've ever seen talk about this, and I love her. The thing is that the overconfidence that comes with pink cloud syndrome can really lead you to a relapse in your recovery from a toxic relationship. It can lead you back, like I said, to get stuck. Now, like I also mentioned, pink cloud syndrome doesn't happen to everyone in recovery. I don't think that I really experienced it when I left my ex-husband, but I did with the parent. But it does happen to a lot of people in narcissistic abuse recovery. So that is an important thing to be aware of if you're just starting out, or even if you have been no contact for a while. Maybe you can relate to this. Let me know. I think it happens because when we first sort of clear that toxicity out of our lives of that person, we start to see the possibilities of what life can really look like without always being controlled, without constantly living under that cloud of codependency. I felt like I had overcome my trauma bonding. I didn't even know trauma bonding was a thing, but I felt like I had overcome the obligation. I've talked often about how I felt that something break inside me when I realized what I was dealing with. I thought that was the thing I needed to get rid of, that cord of obligation, but there was so much more to it than that. When you have all of this hope, you feel like you're on the top of the world and nothing can go possibly wrong. You start to think, well, this is how I'm going to feel all the time. This is great. You figure life has just turned. Suddenly everything is better. And suddenly the only way to go now is up. But while it's an amazing feeling, and while I want to tell you to hold on as long as you can, I also want you to be realistic. And I also want you to recognize that unfortunately it doesn't last forever, because you're still human, you're still going to have bad days. I would venture to say that you, like me, might find yourself sort of dropped off the cloud at some point. It's not funny at all, it's actually terrible, but you do kind of crash back to earth in a most undignified way when you do this. That's when reality sets back in, and all of a sudden you realize that even without the toxic person in your life, there are still going to be difficulties and hard times. And like I've talked before about how I lost a bunch of weight a few years ago, and the similar thing happened to me. I went through a phase where I felt really awesome and excited about it. And then I realized, well, I still have issues. There are still things in my life that are not perfect. What is going on here? And it was really very similar to the pink cloud thing. So you have to remember that there will always still be certain things you have to deal with in your life that are maybe in some cases out of your control. And that tends to break a lot of people when they go through this. You can find yourself in a really deep depression if you're not careful here. Take the time to remember that when you were with that narcissist, you were not allowed to show your feelings. And if you're anything like me, you either shoved them down and didn't deal with them, or you numbed out and you pretended that you couldn't, that they weren't happening so that you could kind of just get through that moment as they would build up many moments, many days, many years. But when we let go of the narcissist and we start to work on our healing and we start to really do better for ourselves, well, there are certain requirements that we need to pay attention to. We need to at some point mourn that relationship. Even if it doesn't seem like we should. I said to myself, like, kind of mourn the relationship while I was still in it. A lot of us say that. There is some truth to that. But when you fall off the pink cloud, then you start to realize, okay, maybe I have a little more mourning to do, or I have a little more stuff to work through, or the feelings all of a sudden hit you that have been kind of hidden from you forever now. So when you've lived in this state of constant control, you've lived in this state of being completely numb emotionally for so long, you might find that normal, as in not having someone constantly control you and hold you down and sort of manage every move that you make, it might at first feel like you're high on life. Like, wow, I get to make all my own choices. This is so amazing. Nobody's telling me what I can and can't do, or what I can and can't be or think or do or feel or have or whatever. You can't even recall, if you ever knew, what real life feels like sometimes, especially if you've been in a lifelong relationship with one of these people. You will most likely have forgotten what it even really feels like to deal with your emotions if you ever really knew. A lot of times when we start out early, we never get the opportunity to learn that stuff. While it's really, really good to feel happy and excited and looking forward to the future, maybe for the first time in your life, use that energy to your advantage. You can use it to sort of help you start to heal and make more intentional choices. All of that is good. Don't misunderstand me. But you have to be aware that the pink cloud sometimes will dissipate, almost always, and that you'll need to keep pushing through those hard parts. You might think you don't need any help. You might think, you can just start living. And I want to say, yes, start living. Do that. But you also have to stick with your support groups or your coach or your therapist, because the pink cloud is amazing, but it doesn't mean you're all done healing. It's just one part of it. You understand? So there are ups and downs in every single recovery ever of any sort of addiction, whether we're talking about a person or we're talking about toxic love addiction, or we're talking about drug addiction or alcohol addiction or whatever, shopping, gambling, all that stuff, food. There's always a pink cloud. If you are struggling with that, I'm going to share with you a few tips today about how to get through the hard parts of the dissipating pink cloud. So number one is going to be focus on balance. Being balanced in the relationship of a toxic nature. All of the emotions are extreme. They're really, really, really good, or they're really, really, really bad. There's no in between. There's no regular or normal. After the relationship, you've been dealing with the highest of the highs and the lowest of lows. And when we come out of the relationship, we just want things to be even and balanced, but we don't even always understand what that means, especially if it's been an ongoing thing. Start to focus on feeling calm and being good with that feeling, and start to focus on releasing the need to sort of feel those extreme emotions in order to feel normal. That's a big important thing. It's not always that easy to let that go so we can feel normal. Normal will feel boring to us eventually, you see. Number two, try to steer clear of the narcissist and places they might go, things they might do. Places you'll drive by and see their cars or whatever. Try to find a different route to work, or look for a different grocery store to go to every time, or maybe change your bank to a different one that's not on the same route the narcissist goes. My point is, reduce the temptation of falling back in with the narcissist by creating new ways to do business, new travel routes, new things in your daily life. That will also help you to, I think, recover faster, because you're not going to be so focused on, oh, I remember we sat here for coffee that day, or I remember we used to do this all the time. You know what I mean? You're going to be focused on now instead of then, which is also another really important thing to do. Number three, along the same lines, create new routines and new traditions. I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. As far as new routines, we're talking about your daily routines like we kind of just talked about, but maybe instead of getting up in the morning and having a cup of coffee right away, maybe you get up in the morning, you start your cup of coffee and you jump in the shower. And then you drink your coffee. You know what I mean? Switch up your routines to fit your new life, and not, don't keep your same old ones from before. And even though it might feel normal to you to continue to sleep on the same side of the bed, maybe switch it up a little bit just to sort of give yourself a different perspective, especially if you're in the same house, rearrange the house, whatever. But then when it comes to holidays, the traditions that you do around holidays, and this can be true whether you have children or not, keep the things that are important to you about the holidays. Like if you always put up a Christmas tree and you always use red bows on the tree, keep doing that if you love that. But if you previously always served a buffet of hors d'oeuvres or something on New Year's Eve, well then maybe this year, Christmas Eve, maybe this year you want to serve like chili or something. Come up with a new tradition is my point. Or maybe you want to go out to eat this time. New traditions can help you really sort of move forward in your new life. And kids especially will love this. But even if you don't have kids, you need to do this because this will help you to sort of continue to sort of extract yourself from that toxic relationship, even though you're already out. And it will really help you to sort of cement yourself into your new, healthier life. Release the traditions that don't fit anymore, and in either case, add in new stuff and new ways to do things. Number 4, don't fool yourself into thinking that you can be friends with someone who has been in a toxic relationship with you. Addiction is addiction. Can't be friends with them. Can't still go to coffee with them on Tuesdays. You know what I mean? You have to separate yourself from that person. If you were an alcoholic, you wouldn't just take one drink and think you were going to be okay, right? Because you know logically that if you take one drink, your body's going to want more drinks. Well, it's the same thing with trauma bonding. You have one little bit of contact and then you want more. I have one client who likens the addiction to her ex like a heroin addiction. She says she gets one little sort of hit of his energy or his attention and then she would immediately want more. And it took her a long time to get past it. But recognizing it from that perspective, I think, is huge in recovery. The same principle applies to toxic relationships. No, don't take one drink. Number 5, get support from a group, a coach, or a therapist, and stick with it. Don't let the pink cloud push you away, at least not for too long, from your support. So we have tons of free support groups, well, not tons, but about 6 or 7 different ones for different levels of recovery and different issues. So if you go to queenbeing.com/span, SPAN, or queenbeing.com/group-support, check those out, see what you can do. There's also coaching available for you on the site. Number 6, watch for your triggers. Have a plan in place for when one hits you. Triggers could be anything. Could be a certain song. I know that after I left my ex-husband, I intentionally didn't listen to any love songs for a long time. Probably at least a year. Because every time I would hear one, I would cry. So I just didn't. I made sure I had only happy music available to me in my car and whatever, and I would change the station if I was listening to the radio because I didn't want to hear things that made me cry. That was just one example. But if you have triggers that things are going to hit you harder, try to steer clear of the triggers. And if you do happen to have a trigger moment, which we all do because we're human, well, then you know what to do. You be prepared ahead of time. Try a pattern interrupt, or you have a plan in place and you work to release the feeling of negativity that comes with it. And you go forward from there. Number 7, keep your eye on the prize. Know what you're doing and know why you're doing it. You are leaving that person or disconnecting from that person so you can move forward and create the life that you want and deserve. So when the pink cloud comes, enjoy it, but be aware that it's going to go away and you're going to hit the ground. And when you do, be prepared and hit the ground running. Don't beat yourself up about it. Just recognize this is a normal thing. Ups and downs are normal in any recovery and any life. So just recognize it for what it is. Try to look at it like a scientist and keep going forward. Keep your eye on the prize. This brings me to the question of the day. And the question of the day is, have you experienced this? Have you gone through the pink cloud thing? Are you going through it now? And if you have gone through it, what would you add? What other tips worked for you to help you get back on track and not get back with a toxic person? Share your thoughts, your ideas, and your experiences in the comments below, and let's talk about it. As always, thank you so much for being a part of my day and a part of my life. And hey, thanks for letting me be a part of yours. It really does mean a lot to me. Now, before I go, make sure you take a look at the videos I'm leaving for you here and there. And while you're at it, hit the subscribe button so we can stay connected and continue on our healing journey together. I'll see you soon.